The landscape for Masterpiece Transformer KOs has changed drastically over the last couple of years. There was a time back in 2019 where it looked like we saw the end of KOs, but KOs re-emerged completely different. They changed the way they did business. They're still around. They're fewer in number. They're harder to get. But we're going to talk about this and the changing landscape in 2021 of Masterpiece knockoff items coming up. First off, it's good to define what a knockoff is, what a KO is, versus everything else that's out there. But a KO is basically an exact copy of someone else's work, someone else's mold. You're actually just copying piece by piece and remaking it more or less exactly the same. Some of the knockoffs make some improvements along the way to make it worthwhile, but that's a knockoff. That's kind of what identifies a knockoff from everything else. Now, a third-party company, we call it third-party. It's not really third-party, but let's just say third-party company makes their own design. And so they're not a knockoff, but they are borrowing from the franchise. They are making a character that looks pretty much these days exactly like it walked off the screen from something of a known franchise such as Transformers, and that's not a knockoff. They're making their own item. Now, if another company borrowed or took their mold and made the exact same figure, then that would be knocking off that third-party company. Where things get even more confused is Fans Toys started out as a knockoff company. Fans Toys made a knockoff trailer. They made an exact replica of the G1 Optimus Prime trailer, but they upscaled it to Masterpiece. And so that was kind of the gray area of knockoffs. If you knocked it off but you scaled it up to a different scale, you were doing something different. It wasn't exact one-to-one. You can't make the mistake of saying original. It's not an original. It's bigger. So that was kind of the gray area in KO for a long time. In the Legends, we're seeing that with McFans Toys. McFans Toys never one-to-one KOs anything. They always upscale it to a bit larger, and it's a larger plus version of the Legends. And we see the same thing. Fans Toys went on to making their own designs. Fans Toys is going on to making their own designs in the Legend, and we see that, and a lot of good can come of this in the future. Another sort of gray area that I guess a line has been drawn recently, but a gray area would be where you would see companies make KOs of G1 toys, but there's no diecast in it. Obviously there's no symbols that look like Autobots. They look different, and these would have parts of them, and maybe even 30% of it that's different, as in they made them even cheaper. There was less movable parts in the brick pieces of Transformers. So these were a bigger letdown than anybody really thought, because when they transformed from one to another, some of these didn't even transform into bot mode. They literally just went into combiner mode and then into alt mode, and that was it. But in the early days of the Masterpiece KOs, in the Transformer world, we'd see Takara get knocked off. It's predominantly just companies knocking off Takara for a lot of reasons. The main reason is that in the early days of Masterpiece, most people only wanted Takara. Most people didn't want the third-party options, the X-Transbots, the Fans Toys, and all of those, because they just had no idea what those would be like, what the quality would be like, and a big part of it was, could I ever sell a third-party figure? Obviously, the Takara stuff, once that run sold out, the prices shot up, so people wanted those. The KOs were an easy idea. KO this product, sell a ton of the fakes, and the fakes would sell as well as the originals. These knockoffs of Takara looked exactly like Takara, transformed exactly like Takara. To the point a lot of people started to question, was it Takara just selling their own KOs? Which is still kind of a question today, and it comes up very often, very frequently. Did Takara knock themselves off? So one of the biggest changes in the landscape of knockoffs is the packaging. So it used to be that you couldn't tell, really, if it was a knockoff or if it was authentic. There would have to be people out there buying both showing every square inch of the packaging and comparing every square inch of the figures side by side to try to find some difference so that you could identify in the wild if you're getting a KO or if you're getting the original. They even had the actual symbols on them. Nowadays, you don't even get the packaging. The KO is pretty darn obvious. You get a brown box special instead of the original packaging. And so that is the first change in the landscape of KOs. So it's good in a way. It's a lot easier to identify you just bought a knockoff versus buying the original. So aside from packaging just being the cheap brown box special, a lot of people are trying to say, well, oh, they're just cutting back in cost. They're trying to save money, save a buck, make it cheaper with the brown box special, not giving the artwork with it. Well, there's a little more to it than that. They scale back on the accessories. We used to see 100% one-to-one, no matter what it came with, you got that accessory, you got that part, you got that piece, and you're not seeing it with these knockoffs. But the other thing you're seeing is fewer and fewer companies even making knockoffs. In the days of knocking off MP36, you had 5 different companies making their own versions of MP36. You had the straight one-to-one KO. You had Magton, Infinite Transformations, Toy House Factory, D-Ban, and they would also come back out, as you can see right here, Infinite Transformations making a cell-shaded version, and then they would make a gold version from another company. There were so many options for MP36. It almost got crazy, like ridiculous crazy, how many MP36 options there were. And MP36 is a very complex figure. It's by no means a simple figure. How are all these companies making this figure over and over and over, that these figures are so plentiful that they went on clearance? They came out around 100 or a little more, clearancing out to 60 everywhere. How could they keep doing it over and over and over? Today we have one option for MP44. I expected to have 2, 3, maybe 4 options for MP44 KOs. By now, we just have the one lonely option, and that same company is actually going to put out a silver-legged version. And yes, you can pre-order it at Shozi if you'd like. I have it pre-ordered. I'm going to check it out. But you have one option. There's not even a rumor of a second option coming. Yes, there was a rumor of a second option. There's no pre-orders. There's no pictures. There's no evidence that there's a second actual company. The only options I see were this same company making the first run and now a silver leg second run. So back in 2019, when KOs really did end, like it stopped for several months, we saw the light at the end of the tunnel with some news of a Dinobot, and that like everybody talked about Dinobot. Whether people even cared about Beast Wars. This is when people that are super G1 only started talking about Beast Wars a lot. Hey, there's a Dinobot KO coming. That was one of the funny things about this figure, this Dinobot. Dinobot was a $250 figure, and if you think about back then, that was a lot of money for a masterpiece figure, and especially for the Dinobot figure. It's a good size figure, but really nowhere near a $200 price point in size. And we had 2 KO options, and still to this day, we've only seen it KO'd by the original one-to-one KO, which didn't get a box. It got the brown box special, and that's what ushered in the brown box special. And then we got the Infinite Transformations version. I believe it was Infinite Transformations that made it, and they put some die cast in it. So they did still put the extra die cast in the figure, which is one of those fun quirks of a KO, because they could do stuff like that. They could add extra flair to it. They were doing that back then. Toys Mage Beast Wars Megatron came out, and it is good, not great. Now, I'm happy with it. I have it. $100 is way better than $320 or whatever they were charging for that thing. They fixed the cracked pelvis issue, so I never saw any cracked pelvises on this. But it doesn't really hold together as well in the alt mode. The panels kind of pop off real easily. Like, you have to keep aligning it to get it just right. So it's not perfect. It is not perfect. But for $100, I think it's a pretty good option. And I like mine. I don't have an issue with it. But this is the only option I've ever seen. I haven't seen a second company come out and try to tackle this. And I don't really know why. Well, the landscape is changing. Those days of even KO competition are over. We do have a KO of the Tigertron. So as we're talking about this Beast Wars. Now, Beast Wars, to me, I always thought that the figures were just way too expensive for what they are. But I guess if you step back and look at it, you could say the same thing about the G1, and you could sort of say the same thing about MPM. So they're all in the same boat. They're all a bit too expensive for what they are. But looking at it, you can get the KO of Tigertron for about $80 or $90 versus double or nearly triple that, I guess, is what the original price was. I know it was at least double, if not triple. But I gotta say that as they keep making these KOs, well, this is the only option for a KO of this guy. But I was surprised it came out so fast. So looking at the future of KOs, we have the upcoming Hound. And there's a lot of problems that we saw with the original Hound. And we saw breakage, we had fragile parts and pieces on that figure. But it's a good looking figure. And these are getting knocked off for about the $60 mark, around the $60 mark. I think you can get them for about $67. That's $100 or $95 or so less than the original Takara. So that's a big deal. That really is a big deal price-wise. But we haven't seen any of them come out yet. And we're starting to hear, okay, well, there's supposed to be one that has like upgrades, diecast, and that kind of stuff. But yet, still in the descriptions, I don't see anything about diecast. And I don't see a release date. I don't see that they're coming. I've got at least one of these pre-ordered. But the thing about it is, what's going to happen with these? Are they going to be a brown box special? How are they going to look? Are they actually going to be improved from the original? Will they have better materials? Will the transformation be okay? Will they look good in both modes? Will they have the paint on them? Because Takara paint them. So there's still a lot of questions about the future of the KOs, and especially these guys. And will the Hound kind of carry the same kind of legacy that Trax did? Trax came out and was a marked improvement over the Takara version, and I think people try to track down the KO over the original when it comes to Trax because it has the rubber tires. Well, for my KO, I don't have an issue with the giant gap in the backpack area. It kind of closes up pretty neat. It does work really well for me. I like the figure, and versus the original, I do see now why people say it was an improvement. And of course, everybody wants to talk about the whole KO, is it okay to collect KO? Guess what? It is an affordable alternative for those who want to collect Masterpiece. I'm not in the camp that says if you can't afford to spend $350 per figure, you shouldn't collect it. I'm in the camp, look for the best option for your money. And I have at least 30 KOs in my collection, and I don't have a problem with it. So that's all I have to say about that. But I do want to say, if you buy KOs, if you're looking to get any money out of them when you sell them, there's really no resale value. So that is the huge downside to this. So on this debate, it's not all peachy, keen, and fun. At the end of it, you are sitting with a very low value item if you go the KO route. Let me know what you think about the changing landscape of knockoffs. Do you care? Are you one that looks for the KO? Do you wait for the KO? Are you one of those that won't touch a KO no matter what? Or are you in between? You can take it or leave it. Like, subscribe to Darren Hanger. Out.